Information and Broadcasting and Government of India for giving me this opportunity to moderate the first session of this national conclave. And I must say that I couldn't have asked for a better eminent panel than what I have here. But since we are running slightly late in the schedule, we are going to be doing a quick round of first remarks by our eminent panelists one by one, and then go for one more, maybe a concluding remark. But let me just set the background of, or the backdrop of this conclave or this session itself. And as you heard through the inaugural session, in the past 9 years, this country has embarked on a path of transformation which is not seen for years together, for decades together. And internationally, I can tell you as a journalist who's been watching this space for 40 years, that India's stock has risen like never before, globally. You heard Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw talking about how the international global leaders recognize India's leadership and look for contribution from India. As probably some of you know, Morgan Stanley said in November 2022 that this is going to be India's decade. In April 2023, IMF predicted India will emerge as the fastest growing economy in the world. India is seen as the leader of the global south, as you all know, and therefore a balancer in the fight between the Russia-China axis on one hand and the Western world on the other. So in short, India is surging. India is taking the lead in trying to balance the global order in the flux that we are seeing. The national conclave, therefore, could not have come at a better time. 9 saal, Seva, Sushashan or Garib Kalyan. So without much ado, let me start asking our eminent panelists to give their views. So let me ask the first question to Mr. Sunil Mittal. All of you know him as a first generation entrepreneur, now a business tycoon, and somebody who has done a very successful journey as an entrepreneur and now having wide-ranging interest in telecom, space, digital solutions and finance or financial solutions. So let me ask you, Mr. Mittal, and if you can address the audience straight looking at them, how do you look back on the past decade in terms of ease of doing business and the policy enablers of good governance that this government has ushered in? How much of a difference policy has made to business enterprises like you, the ones that you lead?
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here this morning at the invitation of our Honorable Minister, INB and Sports, Anurag Thakurji. We heard our Telecom and Railway Minister earlier giving a very outstanding report card of how India has done in the last 9 years. I think each and every part of his presentation resonates with each one of us in a very clear and a loud manner. We have all experienced it. We have all seen the difference in the last 9 years in this country. And in my own personal experience in the industry that I run, let me elaborate a little bit to share some of my thoughts. Businesses in general require very decisive governments, very decisive leadership. And I think after a very long period of time, India came to a point where we had not only a government with full majority, but a leader who is now recognized as a global leader of the world, and clearly one who's determined to take this country into a developed status by 2047. All this requires a lot of determination, a lot of grit, a lot of perseverance, and also requires clarity of mind, after which a lot of issues around execution needs to be watched and governed very carefully. Let's talk about telecommunications. I think India today is one of the most advanced countries in the world in as far as telecom is concerned. My generation grew up in the age of very deep and long shortages of telecom connectivity, to a point today that the deepest, remotest part of the world, you now find people using smartphones, enjoying the benefits of not just pure entertainment, but getting the DBT on through their phones. The Jam Trinity, as was explained earlier, is at full display in this country. we moved very quickly from technology shifts, and India, as you know, has entered 5G alongside with the rest of the world, and in some sense, India now has the fastest 5G rollout anywhere in the world, and it is therefore no mean feat that by 24 March, India will have a 5G connectivity across the country. Earlier, in his very eloquent opening remarks, Honorable Minister Anurag Thakurji mentioned about his experience 12-13 years back in a remote village in Himachal Pradesh, where there was really no real facilities available to, basic facilities available to people with no proper dwelling, no water, no gas, to where we are today. And I think I can add very comfortably and easily one more thing, that however far or remote you may go, and there are still very remote areas where government is reaching now in a feverish manner, but what you will certainly see is a mobile phone, a radio connection there, a DTH television available there. This, to my mind, is the power of technology which this government has used to its utmost advantage of ushering in the reforms and benefits to the masses of this country. I am very proud that we are a part of an industry which is a big enabler for economic momentum. Today, telecom services give additional 1.5% GDP growth to this country. Everything is moving online, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's banking, remitting of payments into rural areas, healthcare, agri-intervention, and now with 5G, you will start to see many more use cases like remote surgeries, drone management, and very, very advanced technologies that can be applied through the advent of 5G technologies. Most of you are aware, during the pandemic, telecom industry stood up and ensured that this country did not miss a heartbeat during the most difficult period of lockdowns. Traffic shifting from urban to rural areas, shifting from offices to homes. This country was fully connected. Everybody was able to enjoy all the benefits that this government had to offer through a highly digitally connected medium. And now the Prime Minister personally himself is watching over the space sector, and we are very, very actively participating and growing in that sector to be again a leading nation by providing space communications in the coming months ahead, covering those difficult areas which are hard to cover by fiber or radio terrestrial network. So all in all, a fantastic 9 years. This country has clearly moved to a additional $1.4 trillion, taking us to $3.5 trillion. And I think the audacious target of $5 trillion that was given looked just a couple of years back like a difficult task, is now clearly in sight. And I think by 2027 we should be able to achieve that.
If I can move to Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, who is the joint MD of Apollo Hospitals and of course leading player in the health sector. Of course COVID-19 was a black swan event, as we know, but India managed to survive and then overcome the odds, as we are aware. Two questions to you related to each other. Health security henceforth is going to be a major concern and major objective of any government, especially in a country like India with such a large population. What do you attribute the success of fighting COVID so successfully? And going forward, how do you see the health sector flourishing, and what policy decisions need to be taken for the health sector, if you can elaborate a little bit?
So let me begin by saying that I don't think there is anyone in this room who was not affected in some way by COVID. And it was so significant, so devastating in so many ways. And yet, we have reason to be extremely proud because our country stood out in its capability to handle a crisis that completely wiped out many, many other countries. And if you ask me how, I will truly begin by saying it was the masterful management of the situation by our Prime Minister and the government. To start with, who has ever heard in the world the concept of a people's curfew? And if anyone has wondered why was that people's curfew important, it gave us the critical time for the hospitals to gear up, the systems to gear up, and to prevent the spread. During that period, hospital design was looked into, extension of manpower, the public and private started working together, manufacturing companies were asked to ramp up their capability, and the fact that we began an extensive and very, very successful plan into building India's vaccine. And the result of this, in addition to that, the underlying COVID strategy, so that not only were 2 crore people given vaccination or 2 crore vaccination doses, and almost 1.2 crore people had 2 vaccines, therefore creating the safety that we have today for us to move around. But beyond that, and what is so commendable and so reflective of India's global thought process, or the Prime Minister's global thought process, is that 50% of the world's vaccines were manufactured in India, and many, many countries were given vaccine even as our country was. So this has created a vaccine diplomacy on an unprecedented scale. In addition to the medicines, the private sector and the public sector standing together, the innovation of creating new beds, the telemedicine, the vaccine like I mentioned, the quick ramp up of oxygen. We had this difficult period and then the ramp up, the communication strategies. Each of these are reflective pillars of a well-coordinated, fantastically masterminded strategy, powerfully executed. During that time, I was not only the president of FICCI, and what a time to be the president of FICCI, but also, in Apollo hospitals. So I saw the medical side, I saw the industry side. We've had many meetings with the government, and I must say that many of them went on till 11 o'clock in the night. Every decision of the government came to us quickly, came to us thoughtfully, and they were asking and listening. So we saw a new phase of working together, which I think will always remain in our memory. And it deserves a big clap. But moving forward, I want to say with great confidence, we began our hospital 40 years ago when people had to go abroad for advanced treatment. And over the last 40 years, we have seen sea change in the capability and the quality of the medical profession and the doctors. But the amazing thing which we have seen in the last 9 years is the access of that. So the Ayushman Bharat, which is spread across the country, 37% of the population covered, over 5 crore treatments being done, and 60,000 crores gone into treatment costs in the public and the private sector. So the framework has been laid. And in addition to that framework, we're now seeing the Ayushman Bharat digital mission. We're seeing 1,27,000 health and wellness centers. So it's treatment, it's coverage, it's affordability, and it's prevention. So I think the foundation is well set. I'll end with one last excitement. Not only can India take care of its own people well, not only will we do research and bring out innovation, but India has become the medical tourism hub for the rest of the world. We are currently at number 4. And I believe that we will very soon become the second largest destination in the world for people traveling to India seeking healthcare. And so I just look forward. There are many young people in the room. Please take the benefit of alternate medicine and allopathic medicine. Use yoga, use Ayush, use healthcare, stay healthy, because India has a great future ahead of us, and that future lies with all of you.
भारत की पोलियो से जीत की कहानी बड़े बड़े शब्दों में लिखी जाएगी, पर इस जीती हुई लड़ाई को कायम रखने के लिए हमें अपने प्रयासों को जारी रखना होगा जब तक दुनिया से पोलियो का खतरा पूर्ण रूप से टल न जाए। खतरा है बरकरार, इसीलिए पोलियो की खुराक पिलाना है हर बार। 2 बूंद हर बार, पोलियो पर जीत रहे बरकरार।
Let me turn from health security to economic security. And Surajit Balla, well-known economist, former executive director of the International Monetary Fund, There is a lot to unpack looking back at what the government has done in economy, but if I were to ask you to highlight 2 or 3 aspects of what you think has been the most successful points or successes of the government in the past 8 or 9 years, especially in the last 4 years after COVID or during COVID, if you can highlight those 2 or 3 points, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. The COVID experience, the last 3 years, have been the most tumultuous for the world economy. Not since the Second World War has the world gone through such a shock. Now, no matter what index you take, whether you take growth, whether you take inflation, whether you take poverty reduction, India has emerged as the best performing economy in the world during the shocking period and today. So, and take for example how much poverty reduction there has been. The entire process of government was geared towards making sure that the bottom half of the population at least did not suffer any hardship as a consequence of this. Then we take the economic management. Remember what the talk was 10 years ago about unemployment, about poverty, about lack of living standards, the toilets. The whole concept that everybody needs a toilet was introduced in 2015. So we heard the remarkable speeches by the ministers before, and that is truly, truly supported by all the data that you can look at. And they gave us a very, very data-rich documentation of what has happened. The railways, I never thought, I was born in independent India in 1948, I never thought that in such a short, or never imagined first of all, the transformation, the infrastructural transformation that has taken place in India. Medical is one such infrastructure, but physical infrastructure, and I'm now working on a study to see if there is any economy in the world at any time which has done as fast and as effective a transformation in this short period of time. We've all heard about China and the transformation that has taken place in China, and that has happened over 40 years. And all I want to do is to try and document that over the last 9 years, the kind of change that has happened in India, has it happened elsewhere? I don't know, but that is a matter of research. One last point I want to say is that what this government has shown is, first, imagine the impossible. Second, to deliver it effectively. That is the real, not only consequence, but that's the real performance index of this government. That they have performed, done things that we never thought would be possible, certainly not in such a short period of time. In terms of global, I must mention, and something that was also mentioned before, that at the IMF, where global security is talked about, global transformation is talked about, fintech, that we are, so the IMF is now sending its staff and its units to other countries of the world to look at what we have been able to achieve. This was, all the time it was that we looked abroad for innovation and then we copied. Here is an innovation that is truly, truly unique, Indian, and better than any country in the world, developed or not so developed. So I think, the books will be written, history will be written as to whether the transformation that has taken place, the speed. I want to emphasize, we all recognize I hope we all recognize that the transformation is pretty close to unique. But the speed of transformation is, I think, absolutely unique. And That's all I have to say, that in terms of what we have achieved, this is absolutely remarkable.
I'll come back to you with a couple of more thoughts on that, but let me turn to Debjani Ghosh, who is the president of NASSCOM. And you've worked on Think Digital, Think India strategy in the past, or in this last 4 or 5 years, since you've taken over as president of NASSCOM in 2018. The IT sector, of course, has been India's pride, but implementing government policies on digital transformation, what has been your experience in establishing digital infrastructure, which is now the envy of the world? If you can share your thoughts on that for this audience.
Thanks so much, Nitin. And before I get to that, I'm going to share a very short story. And this is one of my favorite India stories. Do you know, in 2008, I'm sure it's before many of you in this room were born, in 2008, any guesses what percentage of Indian population actually had bank accounts? Any guesses? It was less than 20%. 17%, 17% of Indians had bank accounts. In 2008, a very reputed international organization came to do a major study in India and said it would take India 46 years to achieve 80% banking penetration, which means it would take us 46 years from 2008 to ensure that 80% of Indians had bank accounts. My question to you, how many years did it actually take India? Any guesses? Yeah? Yes?
Any guess?
8.
8 years.
Anyone else? The same guy's answering.
Anyone else? No.
It took India around 7 years to achieve 80% banking penetration versus 46 years that had been called out. And why? Why were we able to do this? Why were we able to disrupt status quo to this extent? We were able to disrupt it because of 3 things. One, our technology. We came up with digital identity for every single Indian, Aadhaar. On top of that, we built the tech stack, the India stack in India with payments as a core component. And on top of that, we came up with one of the most, I would say, genius programs, financial inclusion programs that I'm sure you all have heard about, called Jan Dhan Yojana. JAM, right? The JAM Trinity program, which enabled us to take the facilities down to the grassroots level and ensure that every Indian had access to banking. And that's how disruption happened. But this disruption did not happen because of just technology. Technology is available to everyone. It's available to every country. In fact, a lot of Western countries have better technology access sometimes. What made the difference in India is the talent, the people. That's our competitive advantage. That is what allows India to challenge status quo, to think differently, and completely disrupt existing business models. It took the all of you heard about the success of the Indian tech industry. $245 billion revenue is what the Indian tech industry generates. It took us 30 years to get to the first 100 billion. It took us the last 10 years to get to the next 100 billion. And we are very confident that it's going to take us less to get to the third 100 billion. I mean, the pace of growth in our technology center, the pace of innovation is just unprecedented, unheard of, and again being driven by talent. It is the talent which has made India the third largest startup hub. It is the talent which has made India the most preferred country for innovation, where companies from Mercedes-Benz to Boeing to, think of the most innovative company you can think of, Apple, Google, Microsoft, They all are doing their innovation in India because of the talent. In fact, I believe that the I in innovation today stands for India, stands for Indians, because we are driving the innovation in almost all products and services that are being used globally. And it is also that talent which has enabled India or given us the courage to completely think differently, whether it was vaccine or whether it was the digital public infrastructure that Nitin referred to. Now, what is the digital public infrastructure? In our traditional world, technology has always been it's always belonged to a few. It's always been the luxury of the rich or the urban. We've always developed technology keeping the top layer in mind, and then we have figured out how do we scale below. What India did is completely turned that on its head and said, we are going to drive human-centric innovation, citizen-centric innovation that will start from the grassroots and then scale up. And we needed the highways, we needed to create the digital highways to give us that exponential scale of digital goods and services. And that's where the DPIs, the digital public infrastructure, UPI, CoWIN, that's where it took shape, and that's where, again, the ability to think differently, the ability to challenge status quo, and the ability to think bottoms up is what made it possible. So I will sum up by saying, when you think about technology sector or the technology in India, it's the people that's behind the success of the technology industry. It's the talent, the 5.3 million people that the technology sector employs. They are the ones driving the challenge, and I'm very proud that the technology sector in India is also the largest employer of women. 36% of that 5.3 million people working in the tech sector are today women. And they are driving that change. They are driving the innovation. And what's unique about Indian innovation is it's human-centric. We start by thinking about citizens, not at the top. We start by thinking about the citizens at the bottom of the pyramid. And we figure out how to build innovation that will change their lives. And then scale it upwards, which is exactly the opposite model of what many of the Western world follows. And I think that is what makes us successful.
Thank you, Debjani. I think very well put. And on that note, I think I should go to Deepa Sayal, who's the president of the Indian Women Institutional League, also a startup mentor, and someone who has incubated many startups successfully. So when you look back, Deepa, and before I go to Soumyakanti Ghosh, who will have the last word in this round of questions on economic inclusion and the kind of joining the dots on the economy is concerned. But when you look back on this past decade, what has been your experience about government policies? Have they acted as a booster? Have they enabled more startups to think in different terms of innovations? And the kind of things that young entrepreneurs are now doing across the country and then taking it abroad. Over to you.
Thank you, Nitin, and I'd like to thank Ministry of Information and Broadcasting for giving me this opportunity. मैं हिंदी में स्विच करूंगी क्योंकि हिंदी मेरी मातृभाषा है. मैं अंग्रेजी बोलती हूं, बट मैं हिंदी में बोलना पसंद करती हूं. मेरी बेटी, मैं आपको बड़े फक्र से बताती हूं कि मेरी बेटी अमेरिका में पढ़ती है और वहां उसका जो सब्जेक्ट है एक, वो है इंडियन इकोनॉमी, और उसमें 20,000 बच्चा पढ़ता है जिसमें एक भी हिंदुस्तानी नहीं है. I am very, very proud. My nation is changing at such pace. जिस पेस पे और जिस स्केल पे हमारी गवर्नमेंट ये चेंज लेके आ रही है, वो काबिले तारीफ है. One state of ours like UP or Maharashtra can go up to an equator European country, one European country. The scale and pace is immaculate. अगर हम मॉर्गन स्टैनली की बात सुने तो वो कहते हैं कि अगले 10 साल में हमारा जीडीपी दोगुना है, जिसका मतलब है $7.5 trillion by the end of this decade. This is huge. I would not only like to congratulate the industrialists or the first-gen entrepreneurs like Mr. Mittal. मैंने एक लघु उद्यमी के रूप में 2008 में स्टार्ट किया था और उस वक्त कोई पॉलिसी या टैक्सेशन इतनी आसान नहीं होती थी कि आप अपना बिजनेस कर पाए. जितना इकोसिस्टम आज फ्रेंडली है, आज स्टार्टअप शुरू करना बहुत आसान है. फंडिंग लेना इतना मुश्किल नहीं है. मैं ये नहीं कहूंगी आसान है, बट आप में से कितने बच्चे, जहां मैं पीछे देख रही हूं, हाउ मेनी ऑफ यू वांट टू स्टार्ट एंड वर्क फॉर योरसेल्फ? प्लीज रेज योर हैंड्स प्राउडली विद डिग्निटी. यस, आई एम सो प्राउड ऑफ माय कंट्री. सो बहुत सारे, मैं एक ऐसी महिला हूं जिसको ये सौभाग्य है कि हर गली गली कोने में, हर एक स्टेट में जाकर मैंने स्टार्टअप से कनेक्ट किया है. मुझे सौभाग्य मिला. महिलाएं, बच्चे, everybody is so charged up to begin and be self-employed. भले वो कैंसर हो, कैंसर इनोवेशन हो, भले वो आपका AI हो, ब्लॉकचेन हो, सिंपल से सिंपल चीजें भी, एक केक शॉप से लेके एक AI, कॉग्निटिव AI का स्टार्टअप, एक छोटे से गैराज में रोबोट्स क्रिएट करना, ऐसा देश है मेरा भारत. आई एम वेरी वेरी प्राउड. ये नंबर्स सभी लोग पढ़ चुके हैं, मिनिस्टर साहब भी और सब लोग, बट जब मैं कहूं कि 450 स्टार्टअप से 90,000 स्टार्टअप्स हिंदुस्तान में आज हैं 2016 से लेकर 2023 तक, what a phenomenal journey. I must congratulate our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, for such a fantastic opportunity provided. Startup India का जो हमारा जो ये माध्यम दिया है मोदी जी ने, इसमें बहुत सारे इंसेंटिव्स हैं. अगर हमारे पास एक यूनिक आइडिया है विच इज प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग, विच इज इफेक्टिव इनफ टू सॉल्व अ प्रॉब्लम एंड लीड अस टू इनोवेटिव डिसरप्शन, हम एक स्टार्टअप बहुत आसानी से क्रिएट कर सकते हैं. मैं ये नहीं कहती कि इसमें चैलेंजेस नहीं है, बट देयर आर लॉट ऑफ पॉलिसी दैट हैव कम अप. बहुत सारे फंडिंग जो है, जैसे हमारा अभी स्कीम आया था सीड फंड, जिसमें अबाउट 1,000 crores हैज बीन गिवन टू 3,500 स्टार्टअप्स ओवर द नेक्स्ट 5 years. This is enormous. I would also like to really appreciate the digital stack, the India stack that has been created. Mr. Modi spoke at Australia. Australia में उनका बहुत जबरदस्त अभिवादन था, अच्छा लगा देख के. बस सबसे अच्छा लगा डिजी स्टैक, जो कि हमारे देश के आधार के साथ जो डिजिटल एनेबलमेंट क्रिएट किया गया है. This is enormous and humongous. So I'll keep my conversation short. But I'm very, very proud. There are a lot of policies that I'll be talking in my next address. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deepa. In fact, that I think is very motivating for this young crowd. आप सबको शायद startup innovations के लिए अगर कोई guidance चाहिए, तो दीपा मैम से मिलिए, उनसे guidance लीजिए. उनके पास काफी information है, तो इसके बारे में वो आपसे ज्यादा आपको जानकारी दे सकती हैं.
भारत की पोलियो से जीत की कहानी बड़े बड़े शब्दों में लिखी जाएगी, पर इस जीती हुई लड़ाई को कायम रखने के लिए हमें अपने प्रयासों को जारी रखना होगा, जब तक दुनिया से पोलियो का खतरा पूर्ण रूप से टल न जाए. खतरा है बरकरार, इसीलिए पोलियो की खुराक पिलाना है हर बार. 2 बूंद हर बार, पोलियो पर जीत रहे बरकरार.
Let me move to Soumyakanti Ghosh, who is Group Chief Economic Advisor of the State Bank of India. So obviously he keeps a very close watch on India's economy, which has emerged from the shock of COVID-19, as we know, relatively unharmed. And now globally India is seen as a bright spot. So how has the government managed to do it? Can you join the dots for us in various sectors and various success stories? If you can give us some of those bright spots and the main contributing factors in India's success in keeping the economy afloat and now becoming the largest growing economy or the fastest growing economy in the world.
Yeah, thank you Nitin, and thank you the organizers for inviting me. I'll make it very short, but in terms of the numbers, I think the pandemic was the largest disruption for the mankind. But one number मैं आपको देना चाहता हूँ. Last year हमारा जो GDP है, nominal GDP expanded by 37 trillion. FY14 से FY20 the average was around 14.5 trillion. So we did 2.5 times more we had done during the 6 years. इसके लिए our recovery was the most fastest. Hard इंडिया का 5 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी, वी ऑलवेज स्पीक अबाउट द 5 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी. अगर आप 1947 में डेटा देखें, हम वी टुक 57 इयर्स टू गो टू 1 ट्रिलियन. उसके बाद हार्ड 7 साल में हमारा 1 बिलियन ऐड हुआ. नाउ द नॉर्म इज दैट कि एवरी 3 years वी आर एडिंग 1 ट्रिलियन. In the last 2 years, our economy added 750 billion. So basically that's why today, in 2014 we were the 10th largest, 7th was in 15, 6th was in 19, 5th was in 22, supposed to be the 4th in 26 and the 3rd in 2028. So this is the transition today we are looking in terms of the rebound. Now actually increased shale production and China went into bunking up this manufacturing production. India has followed this strategy and today if you look into the China से जो exports आते हैं, imports आते हैं, the share of imports of China has actually declined by 200 percentage points over the last 2 years. It could have been even more, but because of the pandemic the number was a little more. In terms of the other schemes which I will want to mention is that as you know the government of India एक PLI scheme launch करते हैं and China से हमारा जो import होता है वो 54 billion है. The objective of the government is that जिस sector में PLI है, I think around 16 sectors are having PLI, we should reduce dependence on these sectors from China imports. So even if we are able to cut these imports by 10 to 20%, this could add around 10 billion to our overall GDP. There are many other numbers. SME is one sector which has been shown remarkable resilience in the last 2 years. एक पोर्टल है उद्यम पोर्टल जिसमें जो सारे SME इंडिया में है रजिस्ट्री करते हैं so that they can get the loan from the bank channel. Till date today 1.77 crores SME has registered on this portal, of which 1.70 crores are mudra. If you talk about the labor, 29 crores.
Can I request you to hurry up?
Mudra. So I want to just sum up by saying that there are several numbers we can keep on churning, but the important point to note is that all these numbers point out towards an India which is inclusive, which is expanding, and which is expanding actually as an exponential state.
Thank you very much for keeping the request. I think आप लोगों ने ये सब नंबर सुने, संख्या सुनी, तो भविष्य में क्या होगा इसके बारे में हम सबसे जानते हैं एक एक सेंटेंस में. सो लेट मी स्टार्ट फ्रॉम दीपा सयाल हियर. व्हाट नेक्स्ट फॉर इंडिया इन द नेक्स्ट 5 to 10 years?
ओके नितिन, मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि अगले 10 साल में जो प्रोग्रेस जैसे मैं देखती हूँ, हमारी पीढ़ी युवा है और औसतन मीडियन एज हमारी 28 साल है, तो मैं अगले 10 साल में एम्प्लॉयबिलिटी जो है एक मेजर अपॉर्चुनिटी भी देखती हूँ और इसको थोड़ा सा चैलेंज भी देखती हूँ. अपॉर्चुनिटी तब जब हम स्टार्टअप्स क्रिएट करें और स्टार्टअप्स आगे एम्प्लॉय करें लोगों को, दैट इज वन. बट व्हेन वी क्रिएट स्टार्टअप्स, उसमें आपका सही स्किल सेट होना, माने कि अगले 10 साल में अगर आपका कार्यभार या जो आप कार्य करेंगे अगर आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस के अराउंड है, मान लीजिए, तो हमारी युवा पीढ़ी कितनी तैयारी कर रही है उस दिशा में ये बहुत जरूरी है. सो स्किलिंग इज इंपॉर्टेंट. स्किल इज द कोर ऑफ डेवलपमेंट इन इंडिया.
आई थिंक दैट्स अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट थॉट एंड आई थिंक ये जो युवा पीढ़ी में शायद ये ध्यान रखना होगा कि आपको एम्प्लॉयबल होने के लिए स्किल्स को एक्वायर करना पड़ेगा, और आई थिंक दैट इज द बिगेस्ट पॉइंट. देवजानी, योर थॉट्स?
So I'll build on what Deepa said. I think the power of our youth, power of talent, power of the innovation that you all are driving, the innovation capabilities, will ensure that when the world thinks digital, when the world thinks technology, when the world thinks innovation, the world will think India. That will be the first name that will come to everyone's mind.
One sentence, one last thought from you.
I think the foundation for a very bright future for our country has been laid in the last 9 years. We have to build now on what we have been able to do. There is a very rare opportunity for India. It's very rare to see a confluence of decisive leadership and strong tailwinds coming at the same time. This is a very delightful position that India is in, and I think we need to take the advantage of it. I will just like to endorse what has just been said. India has about 320 million people in the age group of 6 to 16. in 10 years' time, they will all be knocking very hard on the doors of our society for being included, for being part of the growth story that India is, for jobs that they will need, entrepreneurship that they will create. And for that, they need to be very well educated, they need to be well trained and skilled. Everybody doesn't need to have a degree, but everybody needs to be skilled in participating in this India's growth. So I personally believe, combined with a large population that we have, young population, decisive leadership, and the strong tailwinds that we are seeing after a very long time, holds a very bright future for India.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mittal. Sangeeta, your thoughts, please.
So, I think we just saw that 9 years is exactly 468 weeks. We saw more than 500 schemes launched. So, ye shayad every week ek scheme. What I look forward to is we have the time to guide these schemes over the next 10 years to make us the kind of power position that is being spoken about here. I want to add just one more thing. When Prime Minister Modi said that India will lead the world by women-led development, this is a very important thing. This is not to say I want to see women develop in India. He said I want women-led development, so women are an equal part. This respect for women, this is going to be transformational for India and set an example for the world once again. I think it's one more very important indicator of India's true thought leadership. In economy, we may be 5, we'll reach 3, we'll reach number 1. But in terms of thought leadership, spiritual leadership, and genuine humane and humanity leadership, India is number 1, will always be number 1. Let us give it the economic and the capability and the strength. So the future I see for India is youth with a smile on their face, confident in their step, hope in their mind, but sharing the responsibility of ensuring that we retain good leadership in our country. Thank you.
That's a very, very valid point about women's contribution in India's growth and India's leadership. Mr. Bhalla, your thoughts on what next?
Yeah. Very quickly, remember it was only about 7 years ago when Prime Minister Modi said, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. And we are well on the way for women-led development. And I think but you asked for what next or what new. A lot has been achieved. So what remains? From a purely economic point of view, there is one major reform that India needs, and that's in direct taxation. So our direct tax laws need to be reformed. I will conclude with a simple observation. I don't know how many of you agree and how many economists on the panel agree. We are one of the most overtaxed economies in the world. So I would hope that reform would come such that the taxation structure of India will lower the effective tax rate, and that will help us achieve at least 7 to 7.5% GDP growth a year. Thank you.
Great thoughts again. Soumya, last word to you. And one concern that is expressed the world over wherever I go, people ask, is India's growth going to be a jobless growth? If you can answer that question, because of the large young population that we have, is that a concern?
Thank you. No, I think in terms of future, if you ask me, India has done many first in the last 9 years, and that continues to grow. Starting from pandemic, before pandemic, it has done many first, and I can go on and on, then you have to stop me from discussing. So the second thing, basically, I think in terms of the jobless growth, I think that debate we can do we can do extensive that debate. I think a large part of this discussion on this jobless is based on data which is not there in public domain, but there are also data in public domain which suggests that there is a significant formal job creation. And my sense is that the next 20 to 25 years, as we move towards our 100 years of our Indian independence, I can see more of this happening. And to all the panelists and everybody in the room, I think the most important development, as I said at the beginning, is the women-centric development. In every scheme, the women are now taking the lead. In our bank data also, the home dispersals in the aspirational districts, the women are actually taking the lead. So there are so many data to do. I only wish that we progress in this direction, and maybe we do all the things on the own as we are doing, and next 20 years be India's story as we have seen in the last decade and so.
जैसा कि आप लोगों ने सबने सुना कि भारत का भविष्य बड़ा उज्जवल है, हम बहुत कुछ काम कर चुके हैं, बट बहुत करना भी बाकी है. तो ये आप सबके हाथ में है, ये भविष्य की पीढ़ी है. तो ये ध्यान रखिए, इन लोगों ने जो बात की, स्किल एक्वायर करिए, एजुकेशन करिए, और देखिए कि भारत और आगे बढ़े, अग्रणी हो, भारत में सुधार आए और भारत में प्रगति होती रहे. ये सब आपके हाथ में है. थैंक यू वेरी मच, मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन एंड ब्रॉडकास्टिंग, एंड राउंड ऑफ अप्लॉज फॉर माय पैनलिस्ट हियर. आई थिंक दे ऑल डिजर्व अ राउंड ऑफ अप्लॉज. थैंक्स फॉर दिस.
राष्ट्रीय